Causes it? What causes cervical cancer?
Majority of cervical cancer that we see in our country, like in most developing countries, are caused by the infection with the human papilloma virus. There are many subtypes of papilloma viruses, but there are specific ones, that are subtype 16 and 18 and 33, that actually are responsible for majority of the cervical cancers. Having said that, there are actually a small percentage of women who will still have cervical cancer even if they didn't have the human papilloma virus. The human papilloma virus is sexually transmitted. So that's a very important piece of information when it comes to prevention, because then it follows that in terms of risk factors, the more sex partners one has, the more likely that they'll get infection with the human papilloma virus. And once women have that infection, between the time they get the infection and when they actually develop the cancer, it may be anything from 8 to even 15 years. And that is why we have a golden opportunity to actually detect those changes. And the other good news is that the fact that we can also do HPV testing to know that whether one is actually infected. They say HPV. That's the human papilloma virus. The virus that is responsible for majority. It's actually, you can do a test, a DNA testing to know that whether one is infected or not. And the other good news is the fact that we also do have vaccines against that particular virus that is responsible for majority of the cervical cancers. So having said that, of course, there are risk factors associated.
What are they?
The risk factors that are associated are, of course, a higher number of sexual partners is a major risk factor. We also know that in our country that the sexual debut in young girls is much younger. Majority have the first debut from the age of 10. So having started so early, then they are more likely to be infected with the human papilloma virus. There are also other lifestyle risk factors, like smoking, we know is a risk factor, not just for the ones we know, lungs and so forth, but it's also a risk factor for cervical cancer as well. Yeah, so those are major risk factors.
Of the risk factors.
To add on to that, Sophie, we also have, for women who have had many children, that also predisposes them to having cervical cancer.
Why?
Well, scientifically speaking, and this for me, coming from a non-medical perspective, it's the more you're having babies, probably the more the cells are in abrasion, probably, so therefore more risk of the infection getting invasive. But not even talking about that, look at it this way, Sophie. In Africa, we have more children than in the West. In Africa, we don't have as much screening done as in the West. In Kenya, for example, you will have 1 in every 10 women screened for cervical cancer, and that is voluntarily. Awareness levels as well, that this is actually detectable, is lacking. Many people, even in Nairobi where we are at, where all the services for cancer treatment, majority of the services for cancer treatment are, people don't go for screening. And yet David is saying 8 to 15 years for cervical cancer to develop. What are we waiting for? Early detection saves lives. Let people take their lives in control and make sure that they're taking this conversation to even their sisters, their cousins, their husbands, because you've had, it's a sexually transmitted virus. So the husband needs to know that this is a conversation you need to be having with your wife as well. How often is she being screened? If not screened, if someone is having more than one sex partner, then make sure that you also have this conversation about screening. Because what we're saying is, granted, people will have babies, granted, people will have sexual relations, but take care of yourself. Get screened early. That's a conversation you need to be having.
I like what you're saying, because it's about women and men, I guess, taking charge of their lives. I mean, that is a long period of time to then get into that phase where you're calling the invasion cancer. Because then at that point you say there's nothing much that can be done.
Much can be done in terms of control and treatment and management of the cancer. And actually, cancer is staged from stage 0, all the way to stage 4. A lot can happen between stage 0 all the way to stage 1B, where we're saying treatment is actually can even give you better chances of recovery, and also not having so much done in terms of the hysterectomy, losing all your reproductive organs. But stage 2 to 4, again, there is treatment, management, and the medical field, a lot of advances have been done in that. But why wait for when you have to pay more than 40,000 shillings? A hysterectomy right now costs the common mwananchi between 40,000 and 200,000, depending on where it is that you're going. Why wait when you could have had a cryotherapy, for example,
and you need
for
to break down those terms as you say them, what they mean.
The thing essentially is, if you detect cervical cancer early, you don't need aggressive, expensive treatments, whether they are surgery, whether it's radiotherapy or chemotherapy. It's actually cheaper that way. And as a country, if we are looking at investing in reducing the number of women dying from cervical cancer, then we need to invest a great deal in health promotion and also in preventive initiatives and screening, because it's much cheaper that way. You don't need surgeons and other specialists.